This artifact is commissioned for Robert to share about his childhood, his growing up years, his family, and his law practice, and finally his retirement.
My name is Bob Penagor. I'm 81 years old at the present time. I was born on January 23rd of 1942 in a little town on the shores of Lake Superior called Marquette, Michigan. When I was 6 months old, we moved to a town called Ontonagon, Michigan, both on another town on the shores of Lake Superior. So this is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, on the western part of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I am married and have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. I went to school there. I graduated from there. From that high school in Ontonagon, I went to the University of Michigan and the Marquette Law School.
About how many people lived there? Was it a small town?
When I was there, it was about 2,500 people. It had been that size continuously since the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, the whole town burned down in about 1895. So it had to be rebuilt. At one time, it was the largest little town or city on Lake Superior, but not anymore.
So did they float the logs down a river, or did they use Lake Superior if they were loggers?
Well, they did it mainly down a river. There's a large river that flows into the town from the inland, and most of the logs were floated down that particular river. So that was huge. And the wood was to supply a large sawmill that was owned by what's known as the Diamond Match Company, and that's where they made all the matches, the wooden matches back in the day.
Wow.
In the late 1800s. But the town burned, and that ended that.
Oh, that kind of is ironic that the town burned down where they used to make matches. So,
yeah.
And then your family, actually, your parents came from large families.
My mother came from a family of 12, 6 boys and 6 girls. My dad came from a family of 12, 6 boys and 6 girls. My grandfather came from a family of 10. I have looked back in the genealogy that people have created. I've seen families of 17 kids. So they're all French Canadian Catholics.
Wow. And so did they speak French?
Well, my grandfather obviously was about 12 years old when they came to the United States, and he must have spoken French. But for some, I don't know, odd reason, but they never taught anyone of their kids to speak French. They kind of felt like they were now changing their environment, and they wanted to be Americans. They didn't teach kids to speak the native language.
Huh. Okay. And then how far away is that from Canada? I'm not really familiar with the Upper Peninsula as far as, like, could they see Canada from there?
Well, it's right across the lake, but the lake is huge. It's 100 miles probably across Canada. It's right on the border, actually.
Did it freeze?
Lake Superior has rarely frozen over, but there certainly were icebergs and lots of ice on the lake. All the inland lakes freeze all the way, obviously.
Did you do ice skating, hockey?
Yeah, I didn't play hockey, but our little town didn't have hockey, but I did a lot of ice skating. And ice rinks was a thing to do in the cold winter months, and a lot of fun, actually.
So your mom and dad, when did they meet, and how did they meet?
Well, they're both in the same area, in the same little town. My father was from a little town called Greenland, which is about 12 miles away. So they met, I assume, socially after high school, I think, in the early 1920s. They were married in 1928.
And then where do you fall in the lineup of your siblings?
I'm the youngest of 3 siblings, a brother and a sister.
You were kind of spread out a little bit.
Yeah, I was a latecomer, I take it. My mother said I was the result of a bowling banquet or something, but she was in her mid to late 30s, and I think she was 36 or 37 when she had me in 42. My brother was 12 years older than me, and my sister was 5 years older than me. Both have since passed.
Then you probably remember him at home, but was he in Vietnam, or was he ever drafted?
No. He was at the age to be in the Korean War, and he was drafted, and he was in combat over in South Korea in the early 1950s, 51, 52, in there. But then he came back and graduated from Michigan State as a landscape architect. So essentially, I was basically the only child in the house for most of high school.
Yeah, I was going to say 12 years old. Then by the time you were 8, he was 20. And then what did you love doing as a kid? What were your favorite Saturday afternoon or Saturday events that you would do?
Well, you can appreciate back then there was no TV. We didn't have TV, didn't have any computers, nothing like that. So you were outside all the time playing, and I gravitated towards sports. Played a lot of different sports over the years, and like you said earlier, there was an ice skating rink. We had a beautiful sandy beach 2 blocks away, so summer times we all went to the beach. We swam. We did a lot of those things. All outdoors activities. We had a ski hill in the Porcupine Mountains about 12 miles away, so you went skiing every weekend. You did everything. You hunted, you fished, you name it, we did it.
And then did you grow up in a neighborhood with other kids nearby, or was that something that you had to actually go to somebody's house?
Nope, it was a neighborhood, had sidewalks and places that we all played, somebody's yard.
Okay.
We had different names for different things. We were called the sand rats, the other neighborhood were the dump rats. They had other nicknames for everything.
So then when you would play baseball, would it be like the Sand Rats?
Maybe, but in the neighborhood there'd be a vacant lot, and you just have pickup games, girls and boys, do your own thing. And then as you got older, it got a little bit more organized. But we never even had. There wasn't even a little league in those days. You might have played another town. Some young kids would come around when you got into your early teens, but not until you got to high school could you have more organized sports.
Okay. When you were playing sports with your friends and stuff, who were your best friends that you would play with at that time? Do you remember?
Well, I had my neighborhood friends, but you probably knew everybody. You did know everybody in town, but my best friends were like kids in the neighborhood. Ken Ream, my kids know him, Dennis Allen. I had a cousin the same age, Ron Penagor. We did a lot of stuff with. We ended up playing basketball, the same 4 or 5 guys for when we were in 4th grade, and we continued doing that all through high school. And we ended up having a very, successful sporting career, especially in basketball, because we knew each other and we all played together.
Okay, so your cousin lived near you as well.
He lived out on a farm. I lived in what would be known village limits, but he lived on a little farm 4 or 5 miles out of town.
Were your grandparents alive at that time?
For a portion of till I was my grandfather died in 1956, so I was probably 14. But yeah, they were around most of my younger days, and they lived a little bit out of town. Had lots of relatives. In those days, most of the people, those 12 siblings and my parents, all lived in the area. I have had 68 first cousins, if you can imagine that.
Oh my gosh. I cannot imagine. That's true.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of cousins. So you must have gone to school with quite a few of your cousins then, besides just the one you played basketball with.
Well, no, not really, because only a couple of them lived in my little town, Tanagan. They were spread out, the cousins, and little towns around there throughout the western Upper Peninsula, Houghton, Michigan, and eventually some of them moved away to other states. But in the early years, they were pretty much around there. And then in some families, they actually moved to other places. So, but in the UP, there most of them were concentrated somewhere in that area.
Were you somebody that sailed or?
Oh, no sailing.
No
Didn't
sailing.
have those kinds of sports in those days.
Okay.
You're lucky if you had a power boat with a motor on it on the lake. But water skiing did come into play, and we'd do that once in a while. But sailing was not big. Nobody sailed, despite the fact that they lived on this beautiful lake. Even to this day, there's not hardly any sailing there. I don't know why exactly. People didn't have the money to have the luxury to buy a sailboat like that. But, I've been to the East Coast and the West Coast and, state of Washington. Everybody loves sailing. I mean, even here in Milwaukee, there's great sailing. So I don't know why that was. If everybody worked in a mine or a sawmill, the men didn't have they didn't have the energy to do that after work. Because they worked hard in those mines and out in the woods and, wherever they worked. Our town had a paper mill that was there for about 100 years. It isn't anymore, but it was then. It was very, very solid economically. They had a mine that employed 4,000 men at one time, not far away.
Wow, that's huge.
It was the employment for men from 80 miles, 100 miles either way. From Ashland, Wisconsin to Calumet, Michigan, the guys drove one way. every day or a round trip every day.
Wow.
So it was a huge employer. But like I said, then after you do that for, 8 to 10 hours a day, you don't have time to get on a sailboat and do what's necessary there. So it's a different life.
And then what did your mom do?
Well, my father had a business. She worked as a bookkeeper in a local store for years, but she was basically a housewife, but she was also the bookkeeper for the logging operation. There were times when we'd have maybe 100 men on the payroll, and she'd do all that. And we had a sawmill and, a lot of bookkeeping to be done, and you didn't have computers then. You started to get back in the 50s what's known as a calculator, which helped. That's what she did.
And
she
then
played bridge. Yeah, she was a great bridge player.
for the sawmilling back then was pretty dangerous. You had a lot of belt and pulleys. And so was there ever an accident at your dad's logging company or at the sawmill that brought up concern with your family?
No, well, there were accidents, and it was the early days of workman's compensation. There was the attempt to unionize the place. There was a strike, I recall. But yeah, there were a few accidents. I remember one guy lost his arm in a pulley, and you had big logs going through the saws to cut the logs into lumber. A little cousin of mine drowned in what's known as a hot pond. Men were getting injuries. And the logging trucks on the road sometimes would get out of control in the ice. I know they decapitated some people in a car one time. So there were accidents, but I wouldn't say it was like it was in the old days in the mines. There were power saws, there were big horses involved. There was heavy equipment, bulldozers, a lot of ways to get hurt, rolling logs, falling. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say they were inordinate amount of injuries. The bad injuries were in the deep shaft mines, in my opinion. But yeah, there were.
What did your dad provide lumber for? Did he provide that? Was that also for the matches, or was he just milling the logs into cants to take to other mills, or was he milling like lumber packages?
He'd get the logs from the woods and bring them to the mill, then saw them into lumber, stack the lumber, and air dry it. And it was right on the railroad tracks. Put it on the cars and ship it to Milwaukee, Chicago, wherever. These days, and this wood up there is all what's called hardwood. A lot of hardwood. There was a time when the wood wasn't so good. We would haul it to what's known as one of Henry Ford's sawmills in Kingsford, Michigan, at the Kingsford Chemical Company. These days, my relatives are still logging. Some of the lumber wood is used. You'll see it at the NCAA national championships for the basketball floor. So it's used in all kinds of things, but hardwood is very good for building, as you can appreciate. And that's kind of what they log up there is a maple and hemlock, basswood.
And then the Kingsford, are they the ones that did the briquettes? Would some of those go into the briquettes then?
Yeah, that's true. I think they made the Kingsford briquettes there one time.
Okay,
I'm not sure they still do.
So you still had matches, and now you have briquettes. You just need somebody who's building a good outdoor barbecue. So that is like a long legacy of logging and timber harvesting for you guys.
Oh yeah. And the unusual thing, as you saw in my notes, one of the early guys came in 1850, and he was kind of somewhat of an entrepreneur, and he not only logged to provide wood for this diamond match company that we're talking. You may not appreciate it, but the mines needed a lot of wood for support inside of them. But he also was an entrepreneur enough to get into the cattle industry. So that legacy prevailed all the way up into the 1950s and 60s, 70s, 80s, because they had this cattle ranch that I mentioned in my notes. So my grandfather actually had brought cows from Brahma bulls up from Florida to mix with the Hereford breed which made him a more substantial breed to live in the UP, which you can appreciate as living in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. It's a long winter, so you need a hardy cow. So you had the beef and the lumber industry.
Wow. And yeah, for mining, I mean, you have the narrow gauge, and then you also just have the shoring up of the walls too.
Right.
So I am sure that was and then just building all the homes that people needed to live in.
True. Mm-hmm.
So then for cattle ranching, did he provide the miners with?
Yeah, the mining industry in that area kind of went by the wayside in the late 1800s. Still continued up in what we call the copper country, which this area is part of also. But up near Calumet, Michigan, there were big deep shaft mines. That kept operating to the mid 50s, 1950.
Okay. Now, was that ever an issue? Like when you were growing up, just mining accidents? And so the mines also have air shaft, water shaft, water shaft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these were deep, not where I lived in Ontonagon. We didn't really, mining wasn't so much the history for me. And after I think some of those mines were shut down in 1870, it was primarily logging and lumbering. There was a big kind of a fishing industry there for trout in Lake Superior. But this copper country I mentioned, that's where where all the accidents were and strikes and shootings. And I was in a deep shaft mine this past summer, and you can't believe how many people got hurt and died and maimed in the darkness of these mine shafts. The mine shafts in that area, the one mine, the depth of it is 9,000 feet straight down with 120 levels or more. Very, very bad working conditions. No light, just a candle on your head and a pick and a hand drill. And you'd be amazed at how many people got hurt, how hard it was to work there.
And then did they put mules down into the mines as well?
No, not those mines.
Okay.
Now, the mine in my area that I talked about and my father helped develop, that was a mine where you could drive big vehicles into. You could drive down there, a circular, go down and around underground, hundreds of miles all the way out underneath Lake Superior. It was huge, as opposed to some of the open pit mines that you may have experienced in Minnesota, which they have a lot of.
Mm-hmm. So in your notes, you said that there was a cattle drive and an escape from local Indians with bad intentions. And I was very curious about those.
So I was up in the museum last summer or thereabouts. I probably had heard about this before, but this guy what's the word, primogenitor, or the first person that came to that area in 1850. He was born in 1834 in Quebec, Canada, Sorel, Quebec, Canada. Cattle down in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is 200 miles away. And there wasn't hardly any road. So he'd walk down there. So on his way walking down there, he camped out at a little lake near Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin. It's actually Lac Bout Désert is the name of the lake. And he was sleeping there one night up by a tree, and this woman came up to him who was, apparently he knew, a white woman, woke him up and told him to get the heck out of there. She got him a boat because some local Indians were going to come and rob him. So, and take his money and do whatever to him, right? He didn't carry a gun or anything like that. So the story was he got on the boat. She alerted him, got in the boat, and got away. So, I mean, that's the way it was. He had a 13-year-old boy that he would take with him, get him the cattle, and send him on his own to go this 200 miles back up to this area to have that cattle for these miners. That's what I'm talking about, the entrepreneurship of it. There was no rail line. There were no cars. Hardly even had any horses to do it. So that was a pretty funny story. Well, interesting story, I should say.
Did he ever know who that woman was?
Her name was Bridget Tillis, a white woman from Rockland who lived with the Indians occasionally. Oh. She said, "Hurry up, Conagor, and don't make any noise. I heard a few Indians were planning to take away your money and kill you down by the shore. You'll find a boat. I put it there for you to escape across the lake and strike the road on the other side."
Wow. That's amazing.
And that's in the local museum up there.
Wow, that's amazing. I wonder how things fared for her once the Indians got there and realized that they had been outsmarted.
Well, she's clever enough. They probably never found out, right?
That's probably true. Now, when you were growing up, what was your first job? Did you work for your family, or what was your first job?
Paperboy. I was a paperboy. I worked for the local oil company when I was 15. I worked that summer. I worked as a paperboy for 4 or 5 years before that. I worked for the village, digging ditches and sewers and whatever a young kid does. I worked on the golf course. I worked at Ford Motor Company on the assembly line when I was in college. And then, of course, I went to law school. I was an investigator.
So for the investigator, were you hired like as a PI or?
I was investigating insurance fraud in the Milwaukee area one summer. So I'd drive around and see if anybody was giving fraudulent applications on their insurance for cars. And I got to know the city really good when I first moved there. I didn't know it before that.
Now, did you always want to be a lawyer, or was that something that you decided to do later on?
For whatever reason, when I was 15, I wanted to be a lawyer. At least I didn't want to be a lawyer. I was only a sophomore in high school. I kind of liked the lifestyle of a lawyer, and at that point, I thought I was good with people. I just felt that, and I kind of always wanted to do things for people to help them. I was always I don't know what, spokesperson for my group.
Just because sometimes kids don't know what they want to be. So that's amazing that you knew at 15, like, that's what I want to be when I grow up.
I did know it. I just thought that my personality fit that. I wasn't in love with math. I didn't want to be an engineer. I like the people business and that kind of stuff. So
now, what was your home like when you were growing up? Did you have a Rambler? Was it a neighborhood that was like the mid-century home, or did you have a big backyard?
When I was 8 years old, yeah, we had a beautiful home. We had a nice big old home that was built after that fire. It was built in 1900. It was a large 4-bedroom frame home, tall. And my father got it when some guy defaulted on a loan. Before that, we lived in the same kind of house in a place called Pigeon Hill. All my children know the home. I hung on to the family home till, 2005. But so we spent a lot of time up there over the years. It was a big home. It was basketball court and a yard, but, big yard. So it was a great home, fireplace.
When you went to school, who was your favorite teacher when you were a kid?
I'm not one of those people to have favorite teachers. I cannot really say I had a favorite teacher. There's a bunch of them that I liked. I remember my third grade teacher I really liked, Miss Kilmer. And I remember my sixth grade teacher I liked. And in high school, there's a lot of guys I liked, but none of them were my influencers, so to speak. My parents were my influencers. They're the ones that drove me.
What would you say was your biggest lesson that you learned from your dad when you were growing up?
My dad. Well, I don't know how to really say it. He was an entrepreneur, and I respected him. He was a very moral, good guy. He was, when he died, the whole town came out to the biggest funeral they ever had. He died at an early age. He was someone you'd look up to. He helped raise the money to build the church. He was all kinds of things, in the village council. So it isn't so much what they said or did. It's the example, I think, of the work ethic, doing something that you believed in. If you see a star and you reach for the stars, even if you don't get there, it's trying that's important. All kinds of things like that. It wasn't any one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had an uncle when my father died early. He died when I was 16. I had an uncle that kind of also guided me and took over. He was my dad's best friend. And so he was more, making sure that I did well in college and kept my eye on the ball, so to speak.
But that's hard to not have your dad when you get married, when you have your first kid, things that you'd want to share with him. What is that uncle's name?
My Uncle Lauren Rogers. I'll tell you what, when I think you asked what happens when your father dies when you're 15 or 16, it hardens you. It hardens what you want to do in life. It makes you more focused to do well. For example, he said before he died that he wanted me to go to a certain school and so I went to that school and I did. Coming from a little town, you don't necessarily know that you can compete with other kids, but I went there and I did very well. And then I transferred to Michigan from St. Norbert College in Green Bay. But I always had that uncle there, and I always had my mother, who was a very strong person. She lived to her 90s.
What would you say was some of the biggest lessons that you learned from your mom as a kid?
Save your money. Didn't learn it too well. To be, just to do well, to try hard, work hard, stay focused. These people all went through the Depression, so money was a big thing, to watch your money. And so she was heavy on that one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then to be resourceful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And basically don't give up. Just keep on going.
Mm-hmm. Was she a baker? Did she cook stuff that you loved?
She was a good cook. I don't have any there's things that the French had traditional. I always used to like her cream of tomato soup that she made. She was a very good cook. She had a lot of dinner parties, and But there wasn't any one thing. Pea soup was a big thing for those people. They had chicken booyahs where they had parties, singing and dancing. Like some people have their specialties that Italian ladies, and my wife is Croatian. She loves to make sarma. As a matter of fact, I'm going over today for my daughter. She's making it, which is a Croatian, Serbian type dish.
So that had to have been really hard for you. At 16, your sister would have then been over 20 and your brother would have been gone for quite a while. So did all of a sudden you become the man of the house? Like if your dad was gone, and just how was that to help your mom through that transition?
My mother and I were the only ones who were together, and she exactly said that to me one day. She came up to me and looked at me and grabbed me by the shoulders and told me that I'm the man of the house now. Mm-hmm. I was a junior in high school.
No, had your dad?
We did well together. We actually, we for a while, my father he was home for 6 months, and we took care of him. He what he had was a cancerous brain tumor, and they had cut it out, and he lived for 6 months and passed away right shortly, 6 months after that. But we bonded pretty good, she and I, because of that.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be a time where you guys would have to help each other so much. And then for you, finishing up school, you said you already had your school picked out. How far away was school from where you lived?
The first college I went to it was 200 and some miles.
Okay.
Well, roughly.
So that was a ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a couple of...
You got dropped off. You got dropped off in those days, and that was the end of it. I came home a couple of times hitchhiking, but you pretty much, except for you came home at Christmas and Thanksgiving and maybe Easter. I don't know.
Yeah. And then when you were going to school, when you were a kid, you said that you had a dog.
I did have a dog, yeah, for
Brindle Boxer.
Mm-hmm.
So Hermie. Now was Hermie. So
his name was actually Hermes V. Thuringia II. That was on his pedigree or whatever.
So
we call him Hermie.
How long did you have him?
About 3 years.
So when you were also growing up, do you remember your brother graduating and your sister graduating? Did you go to all their stuff?
I don't remember my brother graduating. I was like 5 years old, but I remember him playing basketball.
So just sometimes when you're the youngest, you do just end up going to everybody else's stuff. So that ends up being a lot. What was one of the funniest moments that you can remember from your childhood?
Well, in my early childhood, one of my favorite stories is when my two friends that are still around today, my best friends when I was like 6 years old, maybe not even that much, maybe 5. We got together, we played every day together. Ken and Jim Olson, we sat under a tree in some yard on Wolf's Hill, and we promised each other on the occasion of burying our favorite little toy underneath the tree that ceremony that we would invite each other to each other's birthday for the rest of our lives. That's one of my favorite memories.
And did you keep that promise?
No, but we still see each other and we still wish each other happy birthday. So maybe that's just as well.
Yeah,
we're all in our 80s now, so.
Yeah, so that's really cute.
We made it.
So since this is kind of more of your childhood time, what advice would you give? Now, what are the ages of your grandkids right now?
My grandchildren are getting up there. They're 15, 16, and teen, and maybe 20, 19. They're all between 20 and 15 at the present time.
Okay.
But I got a new one on the way.
Okay. So then you'll be kind of starting all over. What kind of advice would you love to give to your grandkids?
Well, obviously I want them all to get an education and to work hard and get degrees. But I think that simple advice is just keep trying, and when you're down, get back up. And if you want something, go for it. There's no harm in not making it. The adventure is in trying.